Buenos días, good morning. Welcome to the Instituto Cervantes in Athens. I'm just going to say hello and give you this warm welcome on this very cold day and rainy day. We're very happy to have all our speakers from Spain. They have all arrived safely, although they had to go through some unexpected dangers and threats, but they are all here now due to the weather, basically, and to the natural phenomena of small earthquakes and surprises and that sort of thing. But we're all here, we're all safe, and we're really very happy to host this meeting. I want to mention my predecessor, Cristina Conde, who was the previous director in Athens and who started this project. So I've just been here for 3 months. I'm very lucky to inherit, among many other things, this beautiful project and this beautiful program. And we have tried to make it as warm and important and welcoming as possible. We're happy to have here people who normally don't come to the Instituto Cervantes. So this is a great occasion for us, and we hope you will stay for the rest of the day, that we can grab your interest and your presence, and that you can stay, because, as you know, we'll be here until 6:30 in the evening. The Ambassador of Spain is going to open the meeting, and I'm just here to say hello and to welcome you to our building. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pilar. I have seen you want to share the responsibility with your predecessor, but it's all yours. It's all yours. Although, yes, she did a great job here, and she's partly responsible for this event. Well, I will start with a platitude, something we all know. The Greek legacy is part of our identity. Without it, Europe would not be what it is, Spain would not be what it is, and we would not be what we are. That's a basic fact. We all know it. The ancient Greek history, we're studying our history. When we study Greek archaeology, we're digging in our roots. And it is very important that we keep this very present, that we are aware of this, and that we raise awareness of this fact, because it tends to be taken for granted. And once it's taken for granted, people forget to draw conclusions about it. And from one thing to the next, then they forget completely about it, right? In Spain, there's wide interest in the Hellenic culture. There's a wide array of publications devoted to Hellenic studies and to Byzantine studies. All universities have their departments of Greek history, Greek culture, archaeology. And this conference is a proof of this interest. The aim of this conference is to raise awareness about the work of a number of researchers in Spain and institutions that are contributing to the knowledge of ancient Greece, ancient Greek culture. This is the main object of this conference. But there's another one, obviously, to strengthen the links between Spanish institutions and Spanish researchers with the Greek scientific community. This is very important. We all know that in this field, as in many others, cooperation is of the essence. And these kind of events allow researchers to increase their cooperation. So I'm very thankful to all of you for being here today, for a number of professors who are going to be the speakers today and who are leading figures in the Spanish landscape of Hellenic studies. They are well-respected professors. They have projects underway, and they will present them to us. I'm very thankful to all of you, to all of them for being here. And obviously, I'm thankful to Instituto Cervantes for hosting us, to Pilar, Tena, to the whole staff of Instituto Cervantes for making this possible and ensuring that this event, this conference, is running as smoothly as possible. I hope you will have a very productive day and that this will allow you to strengthen the links between all the participants in this event, in this conference, and the Greek scientific community. And I don't know if I'll be able to stay for the whole day, probably not. But anyway, I hope to see you at the evening at the residence of the embassy. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I don't find the, yeah, no. So just a second, I am not finding the PowerPoints that we should have here. ¿Dónde está el técnico? ¿Te tenéis? Sí. ¿Me has guardado antes los PowerPoints? Sí. New. Ok. Este. Vale. Ok. Vale, ya está, sí. Uno. Dos. Ok. Now it's working. So, sorry for this small delay. Thank you very much also for being here today. Now I give the word to Adolfo Dominguez Monedero. I think most of you already know the work of Professor Dominguez Monedero since many years in the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid and working here in Greece in different projects. Then I should not introduce further Mr. Monedero, and please, it's to you.
Πρώτα απ' όλα θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω θερμά την Πρεσβεία Ισπανίας και το Ινστιτούτο Cervantes στην Αθήνα για τη διοργάνωση αυτής της ημερίδας και για την προσκλήση, καθώς και σε όλους για την παρουσία σας. Θα παρουσιάσω τώρα την ομιλία μου στα αγγλικά. In 2004, a research team composed of professors from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid After 2 years of studies and previous planning, received from the Greek Ministry of Culture and in collaboration, Synergasia, with the then 1448 of Prehistoric and Classical Antiquities based in Lamia, an authorization to carry out a surface survey on the territory of Epignemidi and Lokris. Our application received the unanimous vote of the Central Archaeological Council, Centrico Archaeological Συμβούλιο. Although several of the researchers on the team had already been working for quite some time on aspects of prehistory and archaeology, it was the first time that the Spanish team had received explicit authorization from the Greek Ministry of Culture to carry out an exploration and prospecting project in Greece, despite the fact that Spain did not have, and still has not, its own school of archaeology in Greece, a prerequisite for carrying out these projects in accordance with Law 3028/2002 on the protection of antiquities and cultural heritage in general, για την προστασία των αρχαιοτήτων και εγγενή της πολιτικής κληρονομίας. Epignemidi and Lokris is situated on a narrow coastal strip bounded to the northwest by the pass of Thermopylae and to the southeast by Mount Cnemis, which gives its name to the region. Its eastern boundary is the Gulf of Northern Euboea, while the western boundary is framed by Mount Kallidromos. This is a territory which, until then, had received very little attention from a historical and archaeological point of view, although another part of the Locrian territory, the Opuntian Lokris, had been the subject, years earlier, of a monograph by the Canadian researchers John Fossey. This study served as a model and example for our work, although with the advantage, because of the time had elapsed since its publication until the moment we undertook our work more than 20 years later, that new systems of analysis, such as geographic information systems or digitized cartographies, had begun to develop in a process that has only advanced over time until the present day. We are also inspired by the enormous work of William Kendrick Pritchett, who, in his still irreplaceable studies in ancient Greek topography, had been interested in some areas of the territory of Epignemidi and Lokris. Professor Pritchett, following a tradition that had produced excellent results, combined the study of ancient sources with an extraordinary knowledge of the terrain, which led him to travel on foot on many occasions the routes he wanted to study, making observations that are still valid today about visible remains, greater difficulty or ease of the routes, location of cities, etc. Something of great value considering the relatively little attention that ancient authors paid to this territory. An important part of his work, however, was hindered by the fact that he failed to appreciate in all its intensity the change in the coastline, which has been advancing inexorably since antiquity, favored by tectonic processes, but also by the intense alluvium brought about by the rivers Percheus and other nearby minor rivers, which have extended the dry land to the point of making many of the ancient landscapes difficult to recognize. As mentioned above, Lokris in general and Epignemedian in particular had not received much research attention compared to other Greek territories. One aim of the study was to gather and analyze all the testimonies referring to Epignemedia and to insert them into a coherent historical narrative and link them to the mainstream of Greek history from archaic to Hellenistic period. On the other hand, at the time our project began, a new impetus was emerging in the study of Greek federal states, a subject that had been initiated by Jacob Larsen back in 1968 with his book Greek Federal States. Works had not yet appeared, which over time had become an obligatory reference on this issue, such as Catherine Morgan's early states beyond the polis, and it was not yet time for Professor Giovanna da Vergio-Rocchi to publish her synthesis on the Locrians in the joint works Greek Federal States under Sanctuaries, Identity and Integration, and Federalism in Greek Antiquity, the latter being considered by its editors as the new Larsen. Since we had already published the first results of our work in various publications, they were incorporated and to a large extent accepted in the studies of Professor da Vergio-Rocchi. However, in order to introduce Epignemidi and Lokris into this panorama, it was necessary to carry out a field analysis of this territory, in which we set ourselves several objectives, which we have been developing. Firstly, our project has managed to provide new information about the geographical and geomorphological aspects of a territory such as the Malian Gulf, in which, since ancient times, there have been significant changes, especially in the coastline, affected by very intense processes of silting up at the mouths of the rivers, streams and torrents that mark the region, which significantly changed the landscape, sometimes making it difficult for research prior to ours to locate the physical location of some cities in the territory. This part of research, which was carried out by geographers from the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, was incorporated into a collective work that includes the main results of our studies, to which we will refer below. A major part has been the study of the historical topography. The ancient Greek cities of Epignemidi and Lokris have been documented and located exactly on the map, although it is true that some of them were already well located by previous research. We have managed to establish beyond any doubt the definitive location of some of them, such as Scarfia, one of the most important cities of the Epignemedian Locrians, and of course Nicaea, which appears in Aeschines together with Alponus and Thronion as one of the posts which controlled the roads to Thermopylae, and was the place where the meeting took place in November 198 between the consul Flamininus and King Philip V of Macedon during the Second Macedonian War. Similarly, the field survey has made it possible to detect areas of ancient occupation that had not previously been identified. This has provided us with a previously unpublished information based on the location of the different cities of Epignemidi and Lokris, which is an essential element in order to be able to carry out a historical study with guarantees. Together with cities that are well identified and correctly located in their geographical area, our research on detecting other centers that are not clearly identified with the names given to us in the literary sources obliged us to propose various hypotheses that naturally will have to be validated by the scientific community. This part of the research, on the other hand, allows us to undertake a more general study of the territories and borders of the different cities among themselves, as well as the external borders of Epignemidi and Lokris, especially those with Phokis, but without forgetting those with Opuntian Lokris or Doris. In general terms, and although there may be occasional variations depending on the area, it seems to be possible to confirm that the peaks of the Kallidromus functioned for a large part of antiquity as the most important external border of Lokris. In the same way, we have been able to analyze the articulation between this border region and the coastal region, observing how the location of the cities responds to this double necessity, with police controlling the coastal areas in relation, generally through river valleys, with always located at the main points of passage through the mountains between different territories. This twofold approach has also obliged us to review each of the two areas we have just mentioned, the sea and the mountains. As far as the former is concerned, we must not forget that Epignemidi and Lokris, as part of central Greece, is largely conditioned by its eastern sea front, which has a very peculiar features. The sea that bathes the entire region is a strip of water of varying width, always bounded by the large island of Eubea, which follows almost parallel to the coastline of the mainland, delimiting a stretch known as the northern Gulf of Eubea, which becomes almost a kind of inland sea. The possibilities of economic and military control, the practice of different economic activities, trade, fishing, but also piracy, characterize this region throughout antiquity and explain to a large extent the location of the coastal cities, including the most important cities of Epignemidi and Lokris, Scarfia and Thronion. On the other hand, the mountainous interior boundary is linked to the rest of central Greece by a series of passes, the most important of which is undoubtedly Thermopylae, which marks the northern boundary of Epignemedia, and has played a key role in the political history of Greece throughout the different periods of history. But in the same way, and crossing the Kallidromus, a series of passes, Basilica, Fontana, Klysura, have allowed communication between the different parts of Greece. In this sense, central Greece is one of the most interesting regions, since it is through here and that not only cultural influences have penetrated, but also many of the invasions that have affected Greek territory, and during antiquity, it was one of the usual battlefields as the conflicting interests of the different Greek states converged here. Highlighting this role was also one of our objectives. Central Greece, and within it Lokris, was a territory in which, together with the polis, political experiences of great interest were developed. From the earliest archaic times, the territories of Central Greece were articulated in ethnic unions, in which the awareness of sharing the same identity played a very important role in the elaboration of their political experiences. The oldest regional groupings that we know of for the area, especially the Amphictyony of Anthele, which in time would also eventually establish one of its headquarters in the sanctuary of Delphi, grouped different ethnic units that seem to have been at least as old as the polis. The functioning of the ethnic groupings and later of the federal states presents extraordinary prospects in central Greece, and especially in eastern Lokris, since we have different types of testimonies about it. The study that the project has enabled us to carry out facilitates the task of comparing the literary and epigraphic information with the data that we have been able to compile on the location of the sites and the mutual relations that they maintain. The results of this research were published in addition to various specialized journals and book chapters in a collective work, Topography and History of Ancient Epicnemidian Lokris, published in 2013, which is the only comprehensive work to date on this territory. Over 561 pages of text, the book is divided into three main parts: geography, topography, and history, and 14 extensive chapters provide an exhaustive analysis of all the existing documentation on the territory. Among the most relevant chapters is the second, the Ancient Topography of Epicnemidian Lokris, which in 135 pages presents the catalog of ancient sites, both known and unpublished, which our file research allowed us to visit, locate, and identify, and which would be the main starting point for the rest of the studies included in the book. Also fundamental was the fourth chapter, the Necropolis of Epicnemidian Lokris and the Hippopotamus Valley, written by the then director of the 1448, Maria Fotini Papakonstantinou, and Effie Caranzali, attached to the F48, which presented, along with already known sites, other unpublished ones that had been excavated, often as a result of chance finds and the development of public works by the aforementioned F48. The catalogue of sites and the corresponding information remain to this day the only catalogue of necropolises in this territory. This section was completed by studies on the topography of the Hippopotamus Valley and the so-called Phocian corridor, fortification, communication, routes, and the coastal area. The section on history brought together archaeological, literary, and epigraphic data in a comprehensive narrative from the Neolithic to the Byzantine period. Professors Paul Christensen and Paul Cartledge formulated in 2014 in internal documents seen to the authors participating in the forthcoming Oxford History of the Archaic Greek World the concept of archaeohistory, which implies to take archaeology and history to be symbiotic disciplines, with the aim to seamlessly fuse together archaeology and history. The contributors of the book on the Epicnemidian Lokris are proud to have already applied, we believe, with remarkable success, that methodology. The book, therefore, brought together the work of 15 authors, Greek and Spanish, and also included predoctoral fellows who, at the time in the book appeared, had just completed their doctoral thesis in the Department of Ancient History at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. In the book's acknowledgements, the editors wrote, "We wish this collaboration contributes in the effort for the foundation of the Spanish school at Athens, and more generally to the promotion of relations between the two countries at the level of interdisciplinary research in humanities." The results obtained in this work made us rethink our next steps. The Locrians, always maintaining their identity as a differentiated ethnos, managed to establish at least two federal states, the koinon of the Eastern Locrians, or Opuntians, and that of the Western Locrians, or Osolian. And in addition, at the end of the 8th, beginning of the 7th century BC, they founded a colony in southern Italy, which they called Epicepherian Lokris. As a unique case in the field of Greek colonization, the colony took the name of the ethnos that founded it, since it was certainly not the colony of a single metropolis, but of the Locrian people as a whole. This led us to delve, on the one hand, into the configuration of Western Lokris, known in the scientific literature above all from the important work by Lucien Lerat, Le Locrien de Loué, published in 1952, which remains the only reference word on the whole of this territory, without, until now, any attempt having been made to update it completely, although it is true that in recent years some sites have been the subject of some attention. We could also highlight the brief update carried out in 2008 by Vasiliki Karavetsu and Despina Hatzivasiliou in the Greek translation of the first volume of Lerat et Esperi Lokri. This led us to devote our efforts to issues such as the Locrian ethnic identity, its relation to the creation of political structures, the Western Locrian territory, colonization in Italy, etc. In the same way, the analysis of various legendary traditions with the Locrians as protagonists led us to elaborate an analysis of the two main mechanisms that determine the creation of the Locrian ethnic identity. The first mechanism had to do with the idea of autochthony, the Eastern Locrians being the descendants of the people that emerged from stones thrown after the flood by the Deucalion and Pyrrha, and to whom the eponymous hero Locros gave a new name and with it a new identity. And, on the other hand, through the immigration of part of these people, led by Locros himself to the Gulf of Corinth, thus transferring this ethnic identity to a different territory. And it is possible, although the data are less clear, that this mechanism is behind the confused tradition regarding immigration to Italy, where it would be the aristocratic group of the 100 houses who could bring, in this case through women, this Locrian identity to the colony. This also led us to carry out additional analysis on the territorial configuration of Western Lokris, practically limited to a narrow coastal strip except in the eastern part, where the main center, Amphissa, will enjoy a prominent personality within this part of Lokris. Some ancient authors, such as Thucydides, emphasize this land corridor character of the territory of the Western Locrians. New analysis of the document known from long ago, such as one of the Galaxidae bronzes, which mentioned the colonial reinforcements sent by the Eastern Locrians to Naupactus, allowed us to reinforce the idea of an ethnic identity still shared during the first half of the 5th century BC. And we even tried to show that already at that time, both in Eastern and especially in Western Lokris, the existence of federal political structures, exemplified by the existence of two koina, could be considered as attested, in contrast to Lerat's vision, which placed much later, already in the 4th century, the creation of the state of the Western Locrians. In our opinion, the early creation of mechanisms of collaboration and interaction between aristocracies that share common interests and identities led to a model of territorial occupation in which the control of land and sea routes prevailed, which allowed the extension of the Locrian territory from the Gulf of Itea to the west of the key point that Antirius always meant. Another basic element, the national cult of Aias the Lesser, was an element of integration between the two Lokris and also seems to have left its mark on the Locrian colony in Italy. These new lines of work led us, in turn, to analyze the relations of these Locrians with their neighbors, Phocian, Aetolians, and Acarnanians, and in general with the wall of the Ionian Sea, where aspects related to colonization and communication routes with the West also played a role. The main problem for the analysis derives from the scarce amount of studies carried out and the few existing and published excavations in this region. However, the creation of exhaustive databases of everything known in this region is a big help. Once again, and since new lines of work always open up when a study begins, the area of the Ionian Sea, which he had begun to deal with in relation to the Western Locrians and the neighbors, ended up leading us to the Epirus area. This territory is of great interest from the point of view of the perspectives of territorial analysis, but also of political forms of special interest, since it combined various ethnic identities that ended up coming together in a single state headed by a king. It had the advantage over other territories that it had a long tradition of historical and archaeological analysis, which could almost be traced back to Konstantinos Karapanos, who was the discoverer and first excavator of the main Epirus sanctuary, Dodona, the results of which he published fairly quickly. Similarly, the Nicholas Hammond's monumental work, Epirus, the geography, the ancient remains, the history and the topography of Epirus and adjacent areas, Oxford 1977, to the work done in the 17th by Sotiris Dakaris, Cassiopeia and the Aegean colonies, Thesprotia, together with his large bibliographical output, focusing on such emblematic sites as the sanctuary of Dodona or the building known as the Necromanteia. Once again, the systematic collection of all the published information, which on this occasion we have made accessible to the scientific community through the website of the ELADE Research Group, recognized by the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, was the initial basis of our analysis. In the same way, the elaboration of our own cartography would be, together with the database, the other basic element of our study. Since we do not have the necessary permits to generate our own archaeological information, our analysis always starts from a historical perspective in which we try to integrate in the historical analysis the material evidence excavated or protected by others. However, this approach often achieves excellent results because it allows us to rethink all theories that had become obsolete with the perspective provided by the advance of knowledge. One of the contributions to this debate was to question an idea deeply rooted in research based on an almost passing testimony in a speech attributed to Demosthenes about the existence of an Aegean colonization in southern Epirus. The poor knowledge of the chronologies of the Epirus fortification in the 1970s and the conception of recolonization that equated it more with the European colonial experience of the modern age were combined by some authors to construct an Aegean colonial rule over southern Epirus, established largely through the construction of fortresses that controlled the territory at least from the 7th century BC. In a study we carried out, we demonstrated several facts. First, that there is no evidence, except for this brief pseudo-Demosthenes passage, that the Peloponnesian Hellenics ever carried out any colonization outside their territory. Second, that the idea of control based on fortresses, which were well dated to the 7th or 6th century BC, could no longer be maintained when new studies on Greek fortification confirmed that they were mostly 3rd century BC constructions. Thirdly, and lastly, Greek colonization did not imply colonial rule, I use literal terms, over overseas territories, especially in the archaic period. Beyond these results, which are now largely accepted in current scientific discourse, our aim was to analyze the political structures of the Epirus and their relationship with the territory they occupied. The combination of different analytical procedures adapted to the type of sources available to us has made it possible to establish relationships between the geographical landscape of the territory and the development of political structures in it, so that the complicated orography of the territory, the difficulty of communication, the existence of areas fairly isolated from each other, played an important role in the earliest periods of development in Epirus. However, we have also been able to verify, and we have published works on this subject, that from the end of the 5th century and during the 4th century BC, the insertion of the territory in the game of alliances affecting the whole of the Greek world during the Peloponnesian War played a determining role in the institutional development of Epirus. The result was the emergence of the first identifiable political structures in the territory in the shape of more or less federal models that encompassed what were to become the main peoples of Epirus, the Chaonians, the Thesprotians, and the Molossians. This process goes hand in hand with the appearance, or at least their visibility, of a whole series of mechanisms, including ideological ones, which seek to justify this national political construction, following patterns common in the rest of the Greek world, and which has been well studied in other areas, and which we have been able to verify that they also exist here. Links with heroes of the past as a means of emphasizing their Hellenicity and the claims to legitimacy of certain groups. We have confirmed, and we have provided new data, how this process not only affects the three large peoples mentioned, but also others which, on the fringe of these ones, were also trying to place themselves at the same level, as would be the case of the Cassiopeans. In the latter, moreover, and making use of tools such as geographical information systems, we have specifically addressed his territorial structure, something that had not been done with these study procedures until now. We have also analyzed the places of worship, especially the sanctuary of Dodona, which enjoyed widespread fame throughout the Greek world and acted as a catalyst for the Molossian identity, although it eventually extended to the entire territory of Epirus when it began the process of integrating the different peoples that made it up into a political structure that eventually encompassed all of them. In order to make the general lines of our analysis known and to share our studies with other researchers, we decided to publish another collective work, Politics, Territory and Identity in Ancient Epirus, which came out in 2018 in the Diabasis collection specifically dedicated to the study of these territories in northwest Greece, between the Ionian and the Adriatic. Once again, 10 Spanish, Italian, and Greek researchers addressed various aspects of the history, topography, and political development of Epirus, reporting on the new data we had at our disposal and welcoming new research carried out especially by Italian colleagues in the territory of ancient Epirus. As in the book on the Pinnemedial Lokris mentioned above, the editor of the present volume wrote in the introduction, "Through this work and other initiatives, we also seek to persuade the Spanish authorities to set up the long-desired Spanish School of Hellenic Studies, an institution that would be based in Athens and would constitute an essential means of undertaking archaeological initiatives, prospection, and excavation in Greece." After this publication, our team has continued to explore other aspects that were left out of the book, such as the development of agrarian landscapes in Epirus, closely related to the power structures in the territory, a subject still little studied, and even in other lines that try to link well-known historical figures, such as Alexander the Molossian or Pyrrhus and his son Alexander II, with the processes of transformation of a complex state, such as Epirus, into a political system comparable to other late classical and Hellenistic kingdoms in which Macedonia was an ever-present model. At the same time, we have begun to shift our focus to the island territories of the Epirot, Acarnanian, and Ilean coast, the islands of the Ionian Sea, Corcyra, Lefkada, Zakynthos, Kefalonia, Ithaca, where our attention will hopefully be concentrated in the coming years. Throughout this period, our concern about the non-existence of a Spanish school in Greece has been constant, and we have had many attempts and contacts. Without wishing to interfere in the panorama that Jorge García Sánchez will show this afternoon, I would like to mention that as a result of a series of contacts with convincing many of the interested parties, the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid signed an agreement with Cervantes Institute by which the Institute ceded a space in the building of 48 CU Street to the university to facilitate the creation of the Spanish School of Hellenic Studies in Athens, as well as the development of other young cultural programs. In July 2018, the members of our team were received by the Spanish ambassador to Greece at that time, Mr. Enrique Viguera Rubio, and by the director of the Cervantes Institute in Athens, at that time, Mrs. Cristina Conde, which were reported on the Spanish Embassy's Facebook page. However, and despite our efforts and insistence during this period, various legal and administrative problems have prevented the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid from taking the necessary steps for the implementation of the agreement, which expired, we would say, of natural death 4 years after its signature in November 2020. As a member of a team that has been working in Greece and on Greece for 20 years, and that has been, as far as we know, the first Spanish team, and perhaps the only one, to be authorized to carry out archaeological survey work in Greece, I consider it absolutely necessary to create a Spanish school in Athens, thus joining the other 19 countries from different parts of the world that have clearly decided to establish their headquarters in Greece, the cradle of our civilization. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ για τα προσοχή σας.
Thank you very much, Mr. Monedero. And we have still 5 minutes for questions. If there is any question in the hall, please. Yeah?
Hello, Mr. Monedero. Your Greek is impeccable. Just to make it clear for me, in 2004 is the first archaeological historian Spanish team that gets an official license from the Ministry of Tourism Greece to conduct on the field archaeological work also?
Yeah, prospection, only prospection.
So topography, cartography?
Yeah, and visiting the places, making photographs, making GIS with GPAs, with the collaboration of archaeologists from the 14 FRAs. We were assigned to Ms. Maria Fotini Papakonstantinou, Mr. Petros Kounouchlas accompanied us to carry out the field work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were the head of that team?
I was, we are two heads, myself and Professor Jose Pascual, also from the university. We are the two leaders of the team. Yeah.
Okay. One more question. So you said that you are still doing work in Greece, right?
We are making work with cartography because we have no permit to make prospection. Okay. So this is the problem. We have not a school. We have no permit for a new prospection.
Okay.
So
but you are studying in the Ionian Islands, you said.
Yes. Also with maps to combine written sources, the excavation made by us. We are preparing a book also with the collaboration of Greek archaeologists. We are working on the Ionian Islands, of course, and we are ancient historians mainly in my department, and we work on ancient sources, but with this idea of archaeohistory, we cannot leave aside the archaeology. For us, not all the ancient historians think so. They mostly think about written sources. We think that we must combine archaeology and written sources to have an epigraphy, of course, to have a more adequate perspective to work wholly ancient territory. Thank you.
So, any more questions? We have still a couple of minutes.
Sí, primero en español y luego traduces en griego.
Sí, podemos contestar en tópicos. ¿Qué facilitaría la apertura de la escuela de arqueología en Atenas?
Sí. ¿Traduces en inglés o...? ¿O está ελληνικά?
Ρώτησα στα ελληνικά πώς θα βοηθούσε το άνοιγμα της αρχαιολογικής σχολής στην Αθήνα, της Ισπανικής Αρχαιολογικής Σχολής.
Sí, según el problema es que según la ley griega, la ley de patrimonio, according to Greek law, the law 30,028, για την προστασία των αρχαιοτήτων και εγγένει της πολιτικής κληρονομίας, the only way to make official prospection and excavation in Greece is to have a school. We received that permit exceptionally. They gave us very exceptionally, they told us, because in that moment the Ministry of Culture was interested, I suppose that like today, in that Spain have its own school. There are now 19 countries that have a school. The last one must be, I don't remember well, it's from Polonia or from Romania. And it was a mean to promote, to try to convince to have a school. Without a school, we cannot make excavation nor prospection of our own. We need a collaboration, synergasiai, with Greek institutions, such some of the projects we have looking at today. There are several Spanish colleagues we are working here in Greece, but they are, you have right, in collaboration, synergasia, universities and other foreign schools, and so on. So, for the moment, Spain, Spanish researchers cannot have prospection or excavation or official studies of materials because we do not comply with the Greek law on patrimony. This is the prerequisite necessary to official Spanish institutions can, or teams can do research, archaeological research in Greece. This is the main issue, the main difficulty for us to work here in Greece, unless we collaborate with other Greek institutions.
So I think it is quite clear two things of the talk of Mr. Monedero. The first one is the necessity to work together different disciplines, and the second to have a Spanish school here. Thank you very much, Mr. Monedero. And now it's time for the second talk, the second speech. Mrs. María Paz de Oz García-Bellido. And she's epigraphist, Greek epigraphist in the Universidad Complutense de Madrid, the other big university in Madrid. And today she's going to talk about education and intellectual culture in ancient Greece through the epigraphic evidence. Please, María Paz.
Thank you very much. I have, as you see, changed a little bit. Written culture is what I'm talking about, not exactly intellectual education. Well, first of all, thank you very much to the organizers of this, for us, so important and interesting event. Thank you very much for the ambassador and for the director of the Institute, Cervantes. Well, I am beginning here. I am talking here as a member of the Department of Classical Philology at the University, Complutense University at Madrid, as a philologist and epigraphist. Also as a member of a research group, which is really a macro research group which is called Ancient Epigraphic Texts of the Iberian Peninsula and the Greek Mediterranean, that englobes all sorts of epigraphic texts in all possible languages in the Mediterranean area. It's based on also in the Complutense University in Madrid. And I'm talking also as member of the executive board of the Spanish Society of Classical Studies, whose president is now also the president of the international, the FIEC, the Federal Society of Classical Studies. And they all are institutions which are really very interested in having headquarters in Athens and be able to work in a much easier and much productive way in all aspects of the classical world. Of course, archaeology, but also many aspects of philology, which are the ones I am going now to talk about. There are some philological research projects and groups in Spain which are dedicated specifically to ancient epigraphy, and some of them are centered in the linguistic aspects, especially dialectal issues. The main universities which are working on these aspects are the University of Salamanca, the Complutense of Madrid, and the Autónoma of Madrid. And in this sense, they have done already since many years ago projects like those one I have written there, onomastic and linguistic contacts, interdialectal contacts in ancient Greek, and with sub-projects about modes of dialectal contact and interaction in ancient Greek, phonology and dialectal contact, modes of dialectal contact. Well, as you see, there is always this especially dialectal study of, in linguistic based mostly on archaic inscriptions. The last project you see there, interdialectal context in Dodona and Metone, for instance, has been a long work in those places with, and one of the linguists who have worked on that, Julián Méndez Dosuna at the University of Salamanca, has done good advances in these oracular led pieces found in Dodona, which are now almost 5,000 or so. And then are other sort of projects which focus on other aspects, edition of corpora, literacy, religion, that are more interdisciplinary with philology together with archaeology, history. And the university is involved here. Well, that's the sort of projects in which I have been working most all the time. And with people who are coming from different universities, especially the Complutense of Madrid, Salamanca, also Sevilla, Murcia, Barcelona, Santiago de Compostela. And we have been working especially on both extremes of the Mediterranean Sea, the Iberian Peninsula and Asia Minor, always, of course, with continental and insular Greece as center, and trying to see, to research the relation between both extremes with each other, but also of both of them with the center of continental Greece and the islands. These projects, the ones of the Iberian Peninsula, are what we have done in those projects is mostly the edition of the whole corpus of the Greek inscriptions in the Iberian Peninsula. Working on and researching about the Greeks in the West through the written evidence, mainly through inscription, the roots, the causes of the immigration, the integration in the indigenous and Roman communities, questions of bilingualism, and of course of dissemination of religious ideas and customs, which is very important, especially in the end of Hellenistic and Roman times, with Delos as a main center focus from where East and West come together and expand to the West. And of course, the dissemination of the epigraphic habits, so that you get an idea. All those, the map is not very clear, but all those places, all those figure places where Greek inscriptions have been found. So we know now that there were in the Iberian Peninsula much more Greek-speaking people than we really have been aware. And these are the main routes, well, the ones from Phocea and so on, through Greece, Magna Graecia, and to especially to the east coast of Spain, where we have been studying relations and well, and the projects of the other part of the other extreme of the Mediterranean, especially Asia Minor, are, well, you have there some of them. The main point in these projects has been and is still to see how Hellenism interacts with the indigenous cultures in Asia Minor, how it affected cultures from the East, and the other way around, of course, especially in religion, where we can see the survival of many religious ethnos that come into the Greece part, or more Hellenicized part of Turkey, and in central Greece. There we have especially studied aspects of Greek literacy, epigraphic habit, and more generally written culture. And intellectual education, which is a very important part in the penetrating of Greece into the center of Asia Minor, and here also exchange of religious ideas and customs. Common to all these projects has been always a special interest in the Greek written culture. Why some societies or each community writes what they write and what's the function of that, where they do have these written customs from. Writing is also something we give for granted nowadays, but it was surely not. And now it is a field, a research field, which is being paid much attention in general. In Spain, there are many projects which are working on this aspect, but mainly on Latin, Roman epigraphy. And there is a project which is starting now at the University of Barcelona, led by Javier Velaza, which is on comparative epigraphy. I am collaborated also with this project. That's the idea of the project is to to compare many different written cultures, and this is very important to, this can help a lot to know other indigenous cultures, for instance, in the Iberian Peninsula, Palo-Hispanic, and in Italy, the Italic languages, in Asia Minor, languages like Phrygian, Carian, Lycian, and so on. The comparative epigraphy has already given good fruits to understand much better these cultures, written cultures, and even languages that are not very good known or deciphered today. Of course, Greek epigraphy is for this the main material, because from 8th century BC until the Romans, it's really the most numerous, the most expanded, the most developed, and the richest epigraphy we have in the Mediterranean. So it's a very good way to, we have to know very good the Greek written culture in order to be able to apply it in a comparative way. And now for the rest of the time, I am going to talk about a very concrete, but I think, well, important aspect of the written culture that has to do with education, which is also one of the big research files we're working on. Ancient education, Greek education, especially seen as institutions seen from the epigraphic evidence. Writing becomes an element of comprehensive education in the Greek world, and it has been very much discussed. Why did the Greeks start writing? Why did they adopt the writing of the Phoenicians and developed it and so on? This is a question that is nowadays much debated and not yet really understood, or there are many colleagues everywhere, but also in Spain, who had worked on this. For instance, here, our colleague, Juan Signes. And as I said, it's still a field where we have much to study. I would like to talk here not about this question exactly, though it's very much related, but about the question of why did the Greeks think writing was not just, or not only as a professional skill or a skill for the practical life, but a skill that the aristocracy, the nobles in archaic times, and later on in Hellenistic, at least theoretically, all free men, and even in some cities, women. Why was it important? Why did they have to know writing? When education is configured as an institution, we think we give also for granted that teachers and teaching spaces were always there and forever. It's very interesting to know that the verb didasko, for instance, doesn't appear in Greek literature only for God's teaching people, but not for people teaching other people, until the 6th century, 5th century, that it's not a verb we find normally. This is an inscription from Graecia Magna, where we find it for the first time, this verb, in this sort of vessel inscriptions, which are so frequent. And Morcos dedicated this to Naya. Morcos made it. Pylos taught him how to write it. Morcos, Pylos, and then an abecedary. And this inscription is already from the 5th century BC. Well, we know that in the 6th century, and everybody knows very well these images, from the 6th century, we know there were teachers, there were always painted sitting, and we know by that time a school was, the main elements from education were music, gymnastic, and letters already. And there were private, probably, we don't know very well, spaces where a teacher was teaching a pupil. But what happened before that? When, why, where did writing become a nuclear element of this specific education? Well, for doing this research, we have started looking for spaces where quite a lot, or a good set of epigraphical material demonstrates that there are people together that are learning to write or practicing writing, and when we look for those spaces, we arrive to sanctuaries. This is now a research, a present and future research. A present research is because, well, I will show now some of the material we find in sanctuaries and the theory I have about the relation of this with education. But since we don't have a school at Athens and we don't have really good facilities to study all this, and especially to go to the places, not only to dig, but just to see them, of course, the inscriptions, to make autopsy, but also the spaces where they have been written, composed, where people have been gathering together. We hope in the future, in near future, we will be able to work with all these things in a better way. Well, one of these sanctuaries is the nearby Hymetos, where a lot of inscriptions have been found. They have been already published long ago. And what we find there is a big set of material with inscriptions, with abecedaries, as the one you find in this is from Langdon, in the two abecedaries, the photo on the right. You can see that the first line is much better written than the second line, that it's probably an example of somebody teaching another person to write the alphabet, and, well, to write. There are many other pieces with alphabets, as the one you have on the left side. Those are whole pots, but sometimes they are just ostraca. So pieces were really pieces of ceramic that are used just for writing. They have no other objective or intention. I say that because normally all what is found in a sanctuary, we try to understand it, to interpret it as religious dedications or the writing that has any relation to religion. And what I think after, well, long studies of education and these spaces is that really sanctuaries were, like in other cultures, also in Greek, gathering spaces were, before schools were institutionalized, were really spaces where children and youth people was educated. And so many of these writing vessels, and have, some of them are dedications, but many of them, I think we do not really have to understand them as religious items. This, for instance, is a dedication where we find this katapigon word that is found in many vessels of different parts, especially where we suppose people is gathering, young people is gathering. Is an obscene word that has been interpreted as a possible insult, but in relation to magic, to religion. Really, we find this word, as I said, it's used in some context as insult, but it's also a word that appears, for instance, in Aristophanes, sometimes with sexual connotations, but in some works of Aristophanes, it has the meaning just of an appellative meaning from one youth to another, and even sometimes we can understand it as with the meaning of fellow. That happens in many modern languages, that in a certain age, youths talk in this way to one another. That's in sociolinguistic what is called as peer language, in the frame of age gradation. So I think that this can be an important or a possible interpretation for this graffiti. If we come to the graffiti from Tena, that are also already published in Tchaikovsky, and especially the book of Inglese in 2008, if we can see here the space of the temple of Apollo Carnelius on the left side, and afterwards, a couple of centuries afterwards, the gymnasium of the city was built just there on the, you can see it on the right side, and there is also a space that is supposed to have been a sort of a stadium where people could do training of running or gymnastic sport training. There are many graffiti in this area, in the space of the sanctuary of Apollo Carnelius, and also in the what later on is going to be the gymnasium, with inscriptions engraved on the rocks. In these inscriptions, we find also some of these obscene expressions, and like the ones, inscriptions like the ones you have here. And they have also been interpreted as in relation with religious rituals that have to do with the cult of Apollo and so on. There are also other graffiti like this one, where names of persons are accompanied by adjectives like glorious, good, the best, the first of all. Well, the words Pi and Adolfo, which you have on the first inscription, have been interpreted maybe Pi's as in for youths between 12 and 20 years old. Well, I think that is very varied in different places, but and Adolfos maybe as made in certain Doric spaces. But I want to make attention on the last graffiti underneath Lacididas agathos, Barbax, or Gestaste agathos. Already Santoro noticed that some of this graffiti are hemiepis. They are 2.5 dactyls in the hexameter of the epic. And like here, Laki, Didas, Agathos, Barbac, Sorges, Tas. And Zarima has, even if we see the names, some of them are talking names that could be real names, but many could really be nicknames. And I think this is an important element also in for thinking about why are they writing? Are they really writing this for ritual occasions, or this hexameter or metrical graffiti? I think they have an important, of course, performative and auto-representative and element proper of an aristocracy. We are here in the beginning of the 7th century, an aristocracy that is being represented also in the Homeric work, in the Iliad, and if we apply to this graffiti and to this sort of writing the studies that have been made by Yaguri, or also the paper, or the world on paper, there is in this process from oral to writing a very important element, which is the mental process to make reality or to actualize something which is only oral or has been only oral until that time. So this could be a way of applying these heroic elements or world or to these persons who are, these youths who are gathering there and representing. Well, this would be, we have many other graffiti with this Homeric, like this one in Emporion, or the famous Nestor Cup. Those are graffiti that have been found, we don't know, maybe, or in tombs, or maybe in houses and in the context of the symposium. So it's not the same case, but it would be, it could be the same explanation. And the important thing in the graffiti of Tera is that they are many of them together in this space, where we also find graffiti with the names of Charites, of Chiron. Chiron is another, Chiron becomes, but in the 6th century, the patron of education, of the teacher, of, and I think that's very interesting that this name especially is found or appears in the Tera inscriptions. Well, these are one of the first images, vessels, where we find the figure of Chiron. So when we look for other, not sanctuaries, but other spaces where we know, in that case, that there were really, were surely spaces where youngs gathered together, epheboi, in their practice, formation practice of defending areas. We find, for instance, those in Calami Bay that Garland has called pederastic graffiti. Well, I think they are those sort of graffiti that we also know really in different cultures, and we're also with these epithets of, and also some other with this catapigon or other obscene references. I will very quick just say there are others. In Eretria, for instance, the sanctuary of Apollo Daphnephorios. Many of them, most of the sanctuaries are of Apollo. In some of them appear the figure of Heracles, which is a very important figure in the education institution. Lyceios, which we know is related to the youth in Athens, appears also in the Tera inscriptions. And well, in Komos, in Crete, in Itanos, in the sanctuary of Athenea, Samonia. And then are other sanctuaries that they are just sanctuaries where, that have a very important social function, like the one of Naucratis. But this is already a bit later, 6th, 5th century, where we see they are using also graffiti without any religious explanation or, well, the graffiti of Autónoma that our colleague Adolfo Dominguez had studied very much, the sanctuaries of Autónoma as a place of very important trace, but also where writing was done, and where we find quite many or some graffitis. For this interpretation, we have also some support of other facts. For instance, it's, I think, interesting that Plato, it's true that that's much later, but still in Plato's time, as he says in the Laws, the sanctuaries were used as kindergarten. The nurses brought the children to stay at the sanctuary. And we know that didaskalos, which is first used for the horodidaskaloi, were teachers that learned or taught the children to sing music, which we supposed was done mainly at the sanctuaries. That's the book of Calame, which is so interesting and so good for all these questions. Well, even the possibility of that in some sanctuaries writing was made practiced by cultic personnel, so that they could taught this, and then the fact that gymnasia are, when they start to appear in the 6th century, all of them appear just, or most of them, near a sanctuary, and in some cases, like in Tena, a sanctuary where we have found this sort of graffiti and indication that there was an education space. And this graffiti began to disappear from sanctuaries, of course, not the really votive ones, but the other sort of when this when these gymnasia are founded. Comparative epigraphy comes here also to some help. Of course, the written cultures are very different, even in Greece, but we have parallels for this in the Semitic Northwest Syria and Palestine, where some places where there have been also a great discussion of some of these places were schools or not, but in any case, they are where they have found so many graffiti of this type. They are near the sanctuaries, or the sanctuary of the goddess Retia. In this case, the pieces are votive, but they, we can see that they have been, especially women, have been learning to write in that sanctuaries. It's in fact called a centro escritorio. So concluding, well, sanctuaries as spaces where the youth was educated, I think they were the main spaces, and where a skill of writing was taught and practiced. And the question is, why is it considered a necessary element in the educational set? Well, there are many. Here the answers can be like the answers to why did the Greeks start writing. Some of them can be practical advantages, preserving the literary, but same explanations that have been given, participation in political development. I think those first do really not fit to this question why writing is important for education of the noble families. But if we compare with all these studies of this process of oral to writing in general in other cultures, I think it's important, and we can see that in this sort of graffiti, as an identifying sign and also unifying element of a social group, so ludic, competitive, performative, and also as a tool for analyzing and teaching tradition. That's also very much studied by these authors who study this development of oral to written. And we can see that at the end of the 6th century, and well, especially in that time when we see schools are beginning and so on, we start finding all these didascalia in the vessels, the famous ecnomai that Hippocrates is supposed to have written in Herme all over Attica. It could be also this a tool in order not so much to transmit the literary tradition also, but especially to work on it, to make this process of have the authority of the written element, which is didactic and which can develop, and I think I am talking too much. Well, for concluding, I think a real study of the different centuries with autopsy of the places and all the graffiti inscriptions that have appeared in all of them would be really of a very great help and advance for studying why Greeks started writing and why writing became part of education. And well, I finish here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Deoz. We have a couple of minutes. If there is any question in the hall, please. Yeah.
Okay.
He talks.
Yes. You showed that map of how many Greek epigraphic texts were found in the Iberian Peninsula.
Yes.
Yes, I would like
to see it.
Wait, I search for it. We have here.
That one, yes.
This one, yeah.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. Well, of course, not in all places are a lot of inscriptions, but in all places are inscriptions from the 8th century BC to the 8th century AD.
From?
8th century BC to 8th century AD. There is a big difference between what we find in archaic, classic, Hellenistic time and what we find in Roman times.
Yes, okay, so there are more like 100 locations. Okay.
Yes,
yeah. Another last question. You said that in the beginning of your presentation, you said that there's a certain way that a lot of academics see or study the Greek epigraphies, but you would like to focus more on the, and correct me if I'm wrong, on the literary aspect of it, of the text.
Not only, well, in this, what I have showed, that is an aspect where the, no, I think it comes all together. That's why I think the spaces is very important. It's not the same to write a Homeric verse in a symposium, or what I wanted to show is that when we find all this material in big spaces, in sanctuaries mainly, with other material that I think reveals us that there were youths getting education, like in all cultures. Before you have a school, there are places where the community in certain ages gathers to get the education they need as members of that community. And I think sanctuaries, and well, I want to study both parts. I mean, normally epigraphy is studied thinking of history or political history, social history, but recently it's more and more studied also for literary aspects, because we have a lot of literature that is written in epigraphy that has been always considered minor literature. And it may be minor literature, but it says, it explains us a lot of what was important, why, when, where. So, and I think for that, the interesting thing of epigraphy is the combination of literature with the support of the epigraphic, so the epigraphic material, which is very important, and the place where it has been written. It's not the same as a literary work that has been transmitted through manuscripts or...
Okay. Thank you.
So, please, yeah, sure. Yeah, we have still some minutes. You have the microphone there. Yeah.
Thank you very much for all this panorama of epigraphy in Spain and linguistics and all these interesting things. I found very interesting this aspect of comparative epigraphy.
Mm-hmm.
I think this will be very productive, and we will be waiting for your results. But what I want to ask is to explain something more about your interpretation of sanctuaries as early schools.
Mm-hmm.
Do you base this argument on graffiti only, or are there...
No. Sorry.
Or is there any... You mentioned something from not Plato?
Plato.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not the same.
But you didn't mention the passage, so I don't know what
the passage.
The passage, yes.
Yes,
And
in laws
said,
I put it.
sanctuary says kindergartens. But
yes, he's telling there in the laws that it's like Plato told things. Just it came. He was speaking about the importance of education, and that it's very important to choose the teachers who are going to teach your children very well. And well, he was really very interested in all these questions. Yeah. And talking about that, he says it's even important to have good nurses that are the ones who are bringing your children daily to the sanctuary. I think I don't remember if he says exactly the age, 3 years, or until around 3 years, or if there was other indication that made me believe it was 3 years, but the little children in sanctuaries. I don't say that this is an indication that sanctuaries were schools. I mean, I think sanctuaries were not schools. A school became later, or was the idea of a teacher and a school was created later. But I think sanctuaries were those spaces that all communities have, where the young people gathered and where older people taught them, for instance, the horodidaskalos, taught them to sing and we know, the Kalame explains that very good in his books, that this didaskaloi taught many other things. When they taught to sing, they also taught about literature, moral aspects, and so on. And the evidence of Plato, I think that's only an evidence for the importance of sanctuaries as social and educative spaces. In this case, not educative
general, not education in modern sense, or teaching of writing or reading, all these things. Of course, sanctuaries were centers of gathering inscriptions, and they needed writing because they kept inventories.
Yes, but that comes later on. The first inventories we have are later than this graffiti.
Exactly, it is later, but we have texts, dedications, and all these things. But I think that you have to separate gymnasia from sanctuaries. They are nearby, of course, because it is the public space. But especially you mentioned Tena. If you have you visited this place?
Long ago, not now for...
Okay, it is just a small top of a hill. There is no space to have a sanctuary here and a gymnasium far away. It's all...
No, but what I mean is the gymnasium was later. The gymnasium was built
later than the sanctuary.
Much later than the sanctuary in an area, at least I'm not archaeologist. What archaeologists have said, and what I have read from the archaeologues, is that the gymnasium of Tena is nearby the sanctuary of Apollo Carneios, and it was built a couple of centuries afterwards. And in the space where the gymnasium was built, there are also graffiti from the time, though most of them are on the area of the temple, of the sanctuary. And in Athens, the gymnasia were built, the first gymnasia direct nearby the sanctuaries of
excuse me,
Okay.
You can continue your discussion in the terrace. We have to go now to make a coffee break, and we are invited by the Instituto Cervantes. There are two ways to go to the terrace. One is with the elevator. There's behind this hall, and the other is to the right through the stairs. Please, excuse me, continue the discussion upstairs, please.